Essa entrevista que você vai ver daqui a pouco foi uma entrevista feita por um professor e um dos maiores especialistas em China. Ele é norte-americano, ele vive na China e atualmente, no momento que a gente vem vivendo, tanto comercial quanto, enfim, sociopolítico do mundo, eu acho que é um excelente momento para a gente poder reviver esse conteúdo e principalmente, só para você que é assinante da newsletter aqui da Elemento, vai receber esse conteúdo especial. Então assiste até o final, são um pouquinho mais de 15 minutos, mas de muito conteúdo muito específico sobre a relação China-Estados Unidos, China-Brasil e principalmente na relação sobre tecnologia da China.
Boa noite, eu sou Artur Mendes, sou diretor de projetos do Líderes Amanhã. Estamos aqui hoje com o Jeffrey Towson. Jeffrey ele é especialista em China e vai falar um pouco hoje com a gente sobre como que as mudanças e as relações na China com o mundo e com o Brasil estão alterando a dinâmica global. Thank you, Jeffrey, for coming to be here with us. It's a pleasure for us to have somebody like you talking with us. And first of all, I would like to start this talk like how developed is China now? How did China grow in these years? And is that image of China, like the bad China, the bad quality China, is it gone? How is China right now?
Right, China's a unique system. It's not like other systems. Warren Buffett referred to it. We had some students from China. We took them to Omaha a couple weeks ago. They met with Mr. Buffett. And he just said, look, China has a secret sauce that it's all its own, but it is working. Like their GDP is growing consistently, which gets you a compounding curve over a long time. So wealth, as you grow and you get bigger and you keep growing, you accelerate. And they're basically compounding wealth through their own unique mechanism. So apart from all the news stories and issues that people talk about, you can't ignore the fact that the GDP per capita keeps going up rapidly. It's about $7,000 GDP per capita. Now, 20 years ago, it was $1,500. So that kind of economic progress solves a lot of problems. And so I think that's part of it. Now, maybe the quality, when a lot of people, when they engage with China, say Brazil, they see a manufacturer, they see products. So the
Yes.
quality issue comes up. Our toys are coming from China, our socks are coming from China. That was the story in 1995. Today, products coming out of China, 75% of them are classified as high tech in some way. So everybody's smartphone comes from China, everybody's PC comes from China, all the drones are coming from China, like DJI. So now we're seeing products like that. And there are still quality control issues, but you can't ignore the fact that we're talking about a much higher level of product. If you have an iPhone, it came from China.
Yeah. You can buy every range of quality in China, right? You have the most advanced technology in the world, but if you want the cheap.
Yeah, there's a spectrum, and everyone in China knows this. Do I want the real iPhone? Do I want the good knockoff, or do I want the cheap knockoff? You can always buy all three. And more, as people get wealthier there, they want the real thing now, because they can afford it.
Do you think China is going to overcome the US at any point?
It depends if you're talking business, economics, or foreign policy, or influence, or military, or whatever. And those things I don't really know about. I know business. And if you look business, you kind of have to go industry by industry. If you look at manufacturing, it is very difficult to compete with China. They have such scale. They're so big in this manufacturing base. That's just a very difficult thing to compete with. And not just for the US, Mexico's having trouble. A lot of manufacturers in the world are having trouble because they're huge. Other things like hospitals, no, the US is dramatically better in hospitals. Europe is dramatically better in hospitals. China is still sort of developing in that regard, and they have a ways to go. So you kind of got to go industry by industry. Food is a problem, agriculture is a problem, but mobile apps are dramatically better in China. China is the epicenter of mobile apps. When I come back to the US or Brazil, it's like, this is it, really? They're generations behind what we use on our smartphones in China now. So you kind of got to go industry by industry and see where we are.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're a serious competitor in most areas.
There's something that here in Brazil we always talk about, like China is cheap because the labor laws, or because they pay so much low to the Chinese workers. So what do you have to say about that? Is it true that it's just because of the the low wages?
No, it's not a cheap thing. If you want cheap labor, you don't go to China, you go to Vietnam. You can go to Africa. You can go to parts of India. There's much cheaper places in the world than China. Now, what China has is, let's say we're talking about manufacturing, which is kind of what this is about. We're talking about scale. They're building so many things at such high volumes, and they have such a large domestic market that there are advantages to being big in some fields. If you are making 90% of the world's socks, which I think China is like 90% of the world's socks, you're just better at it than everyone, you're cheaper, but it's not really the low-cost labor effect. The labor's cheaper in Vietnam. So it's definitely, it was an advantage 20 years ago, but the advantages are changing over time from, hey, we've got low-cost labor to, hey, we've got very good scale to, hey, our technology is fantastic. Huawei, the telco manufacturer, which makes phones, routers, cell phone towers, they have 70,000 people in research and development.
70,000.
70,000. No other telco company on the planet has 70,000 people. Most of them don't have that many people overall. So they're doing tremendous just research and development in this field. That's a way of, that's a different type of advantage than, hey, we've got low-cost labor.
True.
So it was a factor. I think it's less of a factor. Plus the wages in China are rising. That's an issue for all the manufacturers, is the cost of labor is going up. They're moving their factories inland. They're moving their factories to Southeast Asia. That's definitely not true on the coast anymore.
We always hear here in Brazil, like, complaining about the government and how the government hinders our ability to grow, right? Brazil is always the country of the future. It's never the country of the present. But in China, you live in a communism. What is the answer to this? Like in Brazil, like you have a communist country, like let's not say that in the theory, the Marxist theory, but it's a central government, right? It should, in the theory, it should hinder your ability to be entrepreneurial. But what happens here?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to equate the political system with the economic system, right? People talk about socialist capital. I mean, they kind of equate these things. China is kind of separate. There is the political economic system, which is its own thing. There's one party that's in charge. There's a lot of state control. There's a lot of state ownership. But the economy is very entrepreneurial capitalism. Everybody's an entrepreneur. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. The heroes of the country are Warren Buffett, Jack Ma, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. Elon Musk is very famous. So the political system and the economic, they're kind of not what you would normally equate with each other. And I think this is in the 1980s, I think it was the 1980s, the president of China sort of came out after they opened up, and people said, you're changing the ideology. And his famous quote, which I'm not getting exactly right, which was kind of right, which is, it doesn't matter if the cat is black or white if it catches mice. And it just was a pragmatic approach. We have our political system, but we are looking for what works economically. And if it works, we'll do it. And they copied a lot from the US. They copied a lot from Singapore. They copied a lot from South Korea. And they ignored a lot too. They said, we're not going to do that. So there's a high level of pragmatism. They were very poor in 1980. China was a very poor country. They didn't want to be poor anymore. So they're doing what works. But the political system hasn't actually changed. So it's a very unusual scenario. But what I see in China is, I'm a business guy, so I don't understand the politics very well. What I see is entrepreneurial capitalism, full stop. Everybody's an entrepreneur. Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. Like, not everyone, but a lot of people. Everyone's trying to be successful and to become wealthy. I don't actually see it as much in parts of the US as I do in China.
Is that the way they overcome the blocks that the government does? Like, is that the way they overcome the troubles that they have with the government?
When it comes to economics, not politics, not other things, economics, the government by and large wants you to succeed. They want you to be successful. They want you to, they encourage, let's put a lot of money in biotech, start a biotech, we'll give you a tax credit. You've created this new bike sharing company. You're putting these bikes all over the place. We're just gonna let that go. It's not legal. There's no rules that say you can do this. You're probably breaking rules. We're not gonna enforce them. We're going to let you run because we don't want to hinder what you're trying to do. So that there's a real tolerance for disruption. if you go to New York and you put 10,000 bicycles on the street, they will shut you down within hours. China just let this happen, and they said, it's fine. So the saying is, in China, to be successful, you have to work successfully with the government. Because they are dominant in a lot of things. But they are more, by and large, on your side. They want you to advance the country. They want you to create new drugs. They want you to do startups. They support you. And that's not always the same in some countries. They don't feel like they're your ally. They feel like they're your hurdle.
Yeah.
China's really not. I mean, now I'm generalizing. So you look in certain sectors and I can find exceptions to that. But if you talk to the venture capitalists, the biotech people, the semiconductor people, the government is doing everything they can to help them. And the words the government said, to get rich is glorious. There's all these quotes about, go ahead, do it. And, as a business guy, I really like that.
Yeah.
If you go into politics, it's a different subject, but that's kind of how a lot of business works. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
So you've been a while here in Brazil, and I know that Brazil is not your expertise,
right,
but what is a message that you could deliver to us, and especially the young leaders here in Brazil?
Yeah, I mean, I've been dealing with, the IFL and talking with those groups, and they're great. And, these are kind of people I identify with because they're entrepreneurs. They want to be on, they admire entrepreneurs. It's a capitalist entrepreneurial group. That's me, right? And one of the things I've kind of been saying is one thing we do see in China is when you're dealing with an industry that's not terribly well developed yet, like retail. Retail in China is actually fairly primitive. It's not Walmarts and Carrefours, which they have. It's still mostly mom and pop small shops, just because that's where it is in the development curve, as opposed to the US. The digital players, the digital disruptors, the Alibabas, the e-commerce, the social media giants, they're doing their sort of disruption transformation to industries that are relatively with low productivity. It's one thing when Amazon challenges Walmart because Walmart is highly productive and highly efficient. It's another thing when an Alibaba, sort of starts working with mom and pop stores across Western China, which have a very low productivity. So your bang per buck in terms of digital transformation is much bigger in a country with low productivity industries. So that's one thing I've kind of been saying here is, look, if you have some industries that are kind of stagnant, the productivity is not good, there's lines out the door, those are the ones you target with digital tools like software, apps, mobile payments, and you'll have a much bigger effect. Chinese companies do this. The leading companies will jump into the banking sector or the hospital sector or the retail sector and really shock the system with how efficient and effective they are. So that's kind of been like my standard advice to people here in Brazil. Look, if there's an industry that frustrates you, a business that frustrates you, it probably frustrates a lot of people. If you come in with a solution that solves that or jumps the problem, I think you'll see a lot of people shift to you very quickly. This happened in China. I mean, the banks were kind of slow and bureaucratic, and they came in with online banking, and 80 million people joined in 6 months because they'd been frustrated for a long time. So I would say target the inefficient, target the frustrating with software and digital tools, and see if you can change the equation.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you very much for you to watching the video. Keep up seeing the news from Líderes Amanhã, and thank you very much.